Welcome back to the monthly edition of the PigX podcast. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. Today's episode focuses on precision feeding and technology, featuring two conversations recorded at the recent International Conference on Pig Livability. First, we visit with Dr. Hyatt Frobose of JYGA Technologies Inc., where he serves as the commercial director for North America. The company develops precision feeding systems for the swine industry. In this conversation, we discuss what success looks like in open gestation systems and review insights from a survey of producers his team has worked with across the United States, particularly around swine health and management. Some of those insights also raise questions about how farm staff interact with new technologies, which leads to the second part of today's conversation with Fred Kuhr. Fred is in his 48th year of swine production and currently serves as the director of production for Dykhuis Farms, a 17,000 sow farrow-to-finish operation in Hamilton, Michigan. He shares how technology is being used on the farm today, including how smartphones help collect and transfer data to the people who need it most, ultimately improving pig health and supporting employee training. Let's start by learning more about Hyatt and his background in the swine industry.
So my background was in swine nutrition. I did my undergraduate, master's, and PhD at Kansas State University. Graduated in 2015 with my PhD in swine nutrition with kind of a minor in swine reproduction. But my focus and my research throughout my PhD program was primarily sows. And so that's where I got connected with JYGA Technologies and their Gestal products. Actually, we had some of the Gestal feeders in lactation at Kansas State while I was doing my PhD research. And so I became the guy that was managing them and knowing how to work them. And I interacted with some of my now colleagues during that initial phase. So when I got to the end of my PhD, there was some demand in the U.S. market for more precision feeding technologies, and Gestal approached me about a role as their team nutritionist, but also to work on developing the U.S. market, and that was 10 years ago. So I'm still with JYGA. We've grown from having just a handful of customers in the U.S. to now I think we have over 230 sow farms using our equipment. That's a testament to the people and my colleagues who make really high quality products, but it's also been fun to grow with the business over these past 10 years. And recently my role changed to where I'm actually overseeing all of North America. So I have Canada and Mexico under my purview as well. And so we're trying to implement some of the same good philosophies that we have in the US across the broader platform.
Great. And so for those people who maybe have not heard of JYGA, can you give me an overview of the company as well?
Absolutely. So JYGA Technologies is based in Quebec City, Canada. They're French-Canadian. And so the name JYGA actually comes from the four guys that created the company back in 1994. And the owners of the company today were actually early customers of that, of the foreign founders of JYGA. But really JYGA's foundation is based on precision feeding. And so we've continued to develop products that are trying to find ways to get the right diet to the right pig at the right time. And for many producers, sows are a high value animal where that might be the low hanging fruit, but we're doing more and more in the growing gilt space. We're doing things with boar performance testing and even some nursery and growing pig research. And so it's fun to work with both research farms and commercial farms, but worldwide we feed about 1 million sows. And so we're in, I think, over 40 countries, but being headquartered in Canada and the U.S. being a big sow base, we do a lot of business in North America.
So your presentation at the Pig Livability Conference was, what does success in open gestation look like? Why was that one of the topics at the conference this year?
Well, we're obviously here to talk about sow livability, and that's because as an industry, we have some work to do, right? We have sow death loss that's higher than it needs to be, and pig losses that we could certainly do better. And so my focus is on the sow side. Pen gestation in general has been something that's met with caution because there's a concern that we're going to have more aggression, more sow mortality because we're exposing sows to situations in pens where we have more death loss. And those risks are credible. In my role, because I work with about 400,000 sows in the U.S., it's how to design pens and strategies and feeding systems that mitigate that, right? And so we've worked alongside customers and we've learned over my 10 years what to do and what not to do. But it was time when I got asked to present this data, I felt like it was a good time to do a survey of some of my existing customers to maybe validate some of the things that we've tried to implement from a concept and strategy standpoint and see, okay, what are they doing day in and day out? And what are some of the differentiations between those with higher sow mortality and those with lower? Because we know we have some farms that are really, really good executors in our customer base, and we have some that struggle. And so we wanted to get a good cross-section of farms in different regions and different management, and hopefully be able to peel apart what are the things that are keys to success, and maybe what are some things that we can, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? Like, and try to differentiate that for future customers, but also to go back and give some feedback to those that participated on what they may be doing different than the ones that are succeeding.
I want to come back to the survey that you did with customers, but first let's maybe set the stage a little bit, because one of the tools that JYGA has is Gestation. Can you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, so Gestation is our brand of feeding systems. It's our primary product line. But essentially, we're individually feeding animals, in this case, pen gestated sows. So in a pen of X number of sows, it could be 10, it could be 30, it could be 100, we are able to feed sows different amounts on different days, or different diets, or different blends of diets. And depending on her particular situation, she may be fat or thin or recovering from an injury, or just be in a position where we want to give her a different diet for an experiment or something. We have the ability to deliver that, and done correctly, we hope that that could improve sow performance and survivability.
So were all the customers that you surveyed using the Gestation product line?
Correct.
Okay.
All the customers that we interviewed are commercial farms of varying sizes, but I would call them general users of our system in commercial environments.
So let's talk a little bit more about some of those survey results that you got. Set the stage for us. You already mentioned a little bit about the size and some of the locations, but how did you go about picking these customers that you surveyed?
Yeah, great question. So we have about 230 sow farms in the U.S. that were candidates. I knew that the survey was going to take a decent amount of time and data retrieval and just time with the customer, and that we may not get necessarily approval from all to participate. But I tried to set a reasonable goal that if we could get 40 completed surveys from sow farms that fit our criteria, I figured that would be a pretty good sample size we could always expand on that if we needed to. And so I worked with a couple colleagues on my team, Dr. Dalton Obermeyer and Amanda Udemark, to develop the survey and the questions that we wanted to ask and the things we felt were maybe going to be the best points of differentiation. And then we ended up approaching a couple of key systems that we knew would participate and asking them if they felt that the structure was appropriate, if there was anything that were asking that couldn't be shared, because we didn't want to scale this up with a bad designed survey. But after kind of screening that with a couple customers, then we went through the process. I actually asked some of my territory representatives who do sales and service to basically, I gave each of them 10, the requirement they needed to complete 10. And we ran into some initial trouble. One of the things that we ran into is we wanted data from a 6-month period, and we landed on January 1 to June 30th of this year, because we felt going much narrower than that might not give a good scope of the long-term performance. But any farm that had a PRRS break during that period, it would obviously mess with their data quite a bit, so we needed to exclude them from the data set. Well, I randomly selected from our list of customers to try to get a good cross-section and assign those to the appropriate reps and things. Basically 10 per region is what I did. Of the 40 that I initially selected, 18 of them had a PRRS break in that 6-month period, so we had to go back to our list and find another 18 to work with. So that by itself is illustrative of the challenges we have with survivability right now. Is health is probably our biggest challenge, and I'm sure you're hearing that from some of the other speakers. But we continued to ask some others, and we ended up getting 38 sow farms that I think represented 122,000 sows in total, that we did facilitated interviews with them, and they got their herd performance. But then also we logged into the Gestation software, and we validated some of their answers with actual records as far as feeding data and animals per pen, and we have their layouts. So we were able to cross-reference some of that, because sometimes people don't maybe give you the full picture. But once we had that data, then we could start to peel apart in a survey format what factors were, and what questions maybe were illustrative of where differences in sow mortality are being seen in these farms.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the questions and characteristics that you were asking, because you showed it was a large myriad of
Yeah.
topics that you asked about.
So we asked about 50 questions, and I kind of broke them into three categories. General farm info, so things like what's your total pigs mated per female per year in that time period? What's your herd size? How many full-time employees do you have? Trying to get a good understanding of the scope of that farm. Then we asked some questions about how they manage their pens, everything from pen size to do you get the sows up every day? How do you fill those pens? Do you do that, all in a single day, or do you sometimes trickle those girls into pens? Lots of questions like that because we've seen differences in execution. And then I also had a section on hospital animal management because hospital animals are obviously ones that are at risk of death. And it's one thing I see very differently managed in a lot of different farms about how aggressive we are in treating animals, how we're housing those animals, how quickly we're pulling them, are we isolating them from others. So I wanted to dive deeper on hospitalization techniques because I've seen that be a driver of different levels of sow mortality in different farms. And so we asked some questions about that too. And then, of course, backed some of that up with the software data that my reps logged in with the customer's permission and pulled.
Did you see any commonalities between labor management practices, size of farm, anything like that?
From size of farm standpoint, we had farms ranging from 1,300 to about 6,800 sows. And the correlation between sow death loss and farm size was very weak. It was slightly higher in bigger farms, but in general, there was no significant impact. For farm staff, we looked at that too, the ratio of how many sows per worker are there on the farm. It was also a very weak correlation. The farms with more staff had numerically lower sow death loss, sow mortality, but it was not significant. So maybe a larger data set that would illustrate that better, but it appeared that you could still maintain relatively good sow mortality with a pretty high level of people, or I mean, pretty minimum number of people in the farm. So it probably comes down to execution and your techniques. We did see some differences in the management strategies between farms, and that's what I tried to dive a little bit deeper in the presentation.
Well, let's do just that because you talked about from the results what didn't matter and what did matter in open pen gestation.
Yeah, so from what didn't matter, there was a few things that surprised me. The staff and size of the farm were good examples of that. Another example of something that didn't matter, we have an electronic sow feeding system, so a lot of people are concerned about, for example, training. Do the gilts need any training before they go into the system? We interviewed farms that were doing that very differently, from everything from intensive training to just making sure they've seen a gestation crate to no training at all. And at least from our responses from the data set we have, there was no difference in amount of pre-training that the gilts had on sow mortality. Alongside that, one of the things that really surprised us was when sows get mixed into pens, what day of pregnancy, and how that impacted sow mortality. And this is a key question because we have a lot of farms now in the U.S. that have migrated to Prop 12 or something like Prop 12 to be compliant for some premium programs. And part of the requirements for Prop 12 is they can't be in a stall for more than 4 hours. So in those farms, they actually need to move to a pen gestation environment right after breeding. Historically, most of the farms that we've worked with would be considered open OPG, which is usually moving the girls after they've been preg checked out of a stall. Very different management style, and the more time they're in pens and maybe in a compromised state as they're maybe a little thinner after weaning and such, it would stand to reason that there's the risk of more death loss if you have those girls in pens longer. In our data set, it actually was the reverse. The sow death loss was actually lowest in the farms that mixed sows into pens earlier. And I don't know if we had enough farms in our data set to totally say that's a definitive answer, but for me, it at least showed me that in a properly managed farm, we can achieve equal or even better performance moving sows to pens right after breeding, which I think would surprise some of the people in the audience that are accustomed to having them in a crate as long as possible. And so those are some of the things that didn't appear to matter. Some of the things that did matter, health status, we already talked about, was a clear one. If the farm was negative for PRRS, it was significantly lower on sow mortality than farms that were stable or positive. but also some things like pen size. We were interested in whether pen size was a factor, because I've generally had the best experience with management on smaller pens, but we saw probably not a huge difference in sow mortality by pen size, but we did see a tendency for smaller pens to have reduced sow mortality. But there were several other factors that were interesting, and things like the percentage of sows in the pen eating per day was a really good indicator of sow mortality. And I think that makes sense, right? If a lot of girls aren't eating or going to the feed station, it's probably not a great sign. But when we log into a farm and we're troubleshooting with a customer, that's an easy thing for us to look at. If the farm has 3,000 sows in pens, and we know that if more than 95% of those girls are eating each day, that can be a pretty good pass-fail on whether there's some bigger problems on the farm that maybe we need to address with the customer, or help them figure out where they need to change other management techniques to get more girls eating. But there was a lot of those types of examples. There was a ton of data I didn't even get to dive into. But there's some interesting things that we're going to take back to our customers and talk with them each about where they stood on the scale with some of the others, and also try to continue to add more information to the data set, because as we add more farms, we may be able to clarify some of those data points that we didn't exactly get the results we expected.
Yeah, that was my next question. Is you have these results, you're going to go back and talk to customers. What practices or things do you anticipate that this will change moving forward?
Well, I think in general, we are going to make sure that we right size the penning strategy to the farm. We were doing that before, but I think now we have a little bit more information to go to them. And there's a lot of factors when you're trying to remodel a farm or build a new farm. And generally, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? Sure, everybody would love to have the ideal Taj Mahal, but it's probably too expensive, or there's other constraints that keep us from doing that. So as I work through those factors with farms as they look to convert to pen gestation or build a new farm, I can now better prioritize which things are most critical for sow mortality and for herd productivity, and which things are maybe more of just a 50-50, it's personal choice. Because there is more than one way to manage this. But what I've learned, and I use this analogy in the presentation, is pen gestation has a lot of factors, and I think of it like a Jenga tower. And you can make some compromises and some concessions in certain areas, but if you pull too many of those blocks out, the whole thing can come crashing down, and you can have a nightmare situation on your hands. And so knowing where that tipping point is, and not pulling out the wrong blocks, is part of what we try to do with our customers and help them be successful.
Okay, I'm going to take us full circle, Hyatt, because what does success look like in open gestation? What does it look like? What kind of impact do you think that this survey data told you?
Success in open pen gestation, I would say, looks like similar herd performance, similar sow mortality, similar feed use to what we're accustomed to in stalls. And so that's something that it can be a confidence builder for everyone in the audience, that we can manage pen gestation with equal or sometimes better performance than we had been accustomed to in traditional gestation crates. But there's more nuance to how we do that. And tailor making their situation to their farm is what this data can help us prioritize those decisions. And so the day-to-day actions of the farm and the way they set up their feed strategies, the way they manage walking the pens and responding to girls that need treatment, those are some of the things that we can go back to the customer and say, these are the critical aspects. These are some important ones, but maybe not quite as critical. Let's make sure we get the big rocks figured out, and then we can work on the little ones.
Is there anything I missed from your presentation you want to go back to?
I think it wasn't the goal of the study to compare Prop 12 strategies to traditional OPG, but Prop 12 has been a hot button issue in the industry, right? And I've had the chance to work with, I've got about 150,000 sows that are housed in Prop 12 environments. I was surprised that our Prop 12 farms had equal or lower sow mortality and equal or better herd productivity than our traditional OPG farms. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should go Prop 12. I think that's a different conversation. But what is encouraging is that we have farms in the U.S. industry that have shown that there's a path to high performance and good animal welfare in Prop 12 environments. And that's good that we've learned some things over these first few years on the blueprint for success with that. And I think that can serve as an encouraging thought as we we are likely to continue to face more animal welfare constraints and restrictions or ballot measures that are not always backed by science, but it's encouraging as an industry that we can respond to these challenges and rise to the occasion and ultimately come out with high quality animal welfare for the sow, but still performance that matches our expectations.
That was a lot of great information, and we truly appreciate Hyatt's expertise shared here on the PigX podcast. Now let's turn to Fred to learn more about his long tenure in the swine industry and hear his perspective on how technology continues to shape today's farms.
So I've been in the industry a long time. So probably just going backwards from now, I've been director of production at Dykhuis Farms for about 6 years now. The 10 years in before that, I was director of production for professional swine management / Carthage, and then was director of breed to wean for the mass shops.
You've had quite the career then.
Been around a while, yes. So Dykhuis Farms has been, it's a long time family farm in actually Hamilton, Michigan, which is really close to Holland, Michigan. Joe Dykhuis is the president. His father is Robert Dykhuis. That's the one that started it. So it started back in the late 70s and has worked its way all the way up to a great farm where it is today.
So in each of the roles that you've been in previously before Dykhuis Farms, what kind of technology did you use and how has that shaped your role today?
So earlier in my career, right, we used we did a lot of transferring papers and fax machines and all sorts of different things. We have tried some on-farm inputting, but that mainly just moved the inputting out of the office onto the farm, and you had to have a person do that. So now with the technology that Dykhuis Farms is using, the PigFlow program, everybody's putting it in as they're doing it. So there's no transferring numbers. Much faster, much easier. I think the right way to do it.
Yeah, less human error overall, it sounds like. So PigFlow is really the main program you talked about today. You talked about Maximus and a few others as well, but let's start with PigFlow. Talk to us about how Dykhuis Farms specifically uses PigFlow, because I know lots of systems use it, but everyone looks a little different from farm to farm.
I'm a little bit biased because I truly enjoy PigFlow. We have all of our farms on PigFlow. So we have all of that communication coming to the office. It's funny, out of 80 some employees, I've only had one that hasn't learned how to use it. And he's only 72, so we'll give him a pass, right? So, but no, we're using it for transferring data. We're using it for training people. There's so many things we're getting out of it, right? We can, with that program, we are able to tell the finishers exactly what age of pig that they're putting into the finishing barn. Weights is a calculation, but and there will be a time that we can tell you how many gill progeny are going into that farm.
That's pretty amazing, just the amount of information that is at people's fingertips, because everyone uses a personal device, handheld device, to manage their own PigFlow information. What was the thought process behind giving everyone a smartphone? Maybe you mentioned you can't call or do some of those features, but everybody has this device.
Yeah, I mean, I won't deny it freaked me out at first, right? Because we have phones on the farm, right? And everywhere. But because they're locked down, because there's no phone number attached to them, actually the younger people that we have working for us love them because, they know how to play. They know play isn't the right word, but they know how to work on them. They know how to use them. They've been texting and doing all those things their whole life. So I actually think we get some we've picked up a little job satisfaction out of being able to do those things.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure that makes maybe younger people more interested in working with you on the farm as well, knowing you're kind of a technology innovative company in that space as well.
We sure hope so, right? It is really fun to see how fast the new employees can pick up what they're doing with those phones, right? So I would say 48 hours, you're fully functional, right? And because it is user friendly, and they're comfortable with that.
That's great. So talk to me a little bit too about how I got this premise from your presentation that you're really kind of using technology to engage, champion, and improve your teams.
Absolutely. So because of having all that data at our fingertips today, so what happened an hour ago, what happened 5 minutes ago, we can see already, right? So we're pulling in other programs to help us with that, right? We talked about Pork Avenue, we talked about Cloverleaf, right? We using those personality and training programs because now we can see where that employee is struggling to pick things up.
Fred, did I miss anything else from your presentation today that you want to share?
I ran out of time. So, how some of the other technologies are coming into play, right? So, the heat mats, everybody said that they're going to lower electricity costs. We're seeing that, but the other things that come with that is all of a sudden we don't have any heat lamps, right? We don't have any heat lamp bulbs. We don't have to set up rooms with that. Now we can get the technology of the wash power, right? And so as we're gaining on these technologies, they're feeding us into the other ones, and we're seeing some really great things.
A little bit of a domino effect then, maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
Today's conversation highlighted several technology advancements and how they are being used on the farm to support swine herd health. From precision feeding equipment to ensuring farm teams can effectively use and communicate through new tools, we heard two unique perspectives on today's podcast. Thank you to both Hyatt and Fred for coming on today's podcast, and thank you to all of you for joining in. We'll be back next month with another timely conversation. Until then, I'm Delaney Howell, and this has been the PigX Podcast.
PigX is a national podcast hosted by the Pig Livability Project partners at Iowa State University, Kansas State University, and Purdue, and supported by the Iowa Pork Industry Center. For more information on the project, head to www.piglivability.org, or to inquire directly with questions regarding the project, email ipic.iastate.edu. PigX, ideas in the swine industry worth sharing.